Everybody, as you can tell by my jumper, we are getting closer than ever to Christmas. It's 2 weeks on Sunday, 2 weeks and 2 days to be precise. I'm very excited. I love Christmas, and however you celebrate the holidays, I hope you are excited too. I just really love mince pies, actually. I don't know if there are any mince pie fans amongst you. I don't know if you even call them that in America, actually. It's not mince like a meat, it's like mince meat. That clears things up great, doesn't it? No, mince meat as in like currants and raisins and sultanas in some kind of weird gloopy dark goo that I don't actually know what it is. So if you fancy a pastry full of mincemeat, try mince pie if you haven't tried one. Yes, this is the quality of the Alexander Gordon Smith banter. I should have brought a mince pie in with me, shouldn't I? I've eaten, I'm not actually joking, I've eaten about 15 mince pies in the last 2 days, and they're not small, but they're so delicious. Anyway, speaking of mince pies, The Fury. Absolutely no connection there at all, but I thought I might get away with it. In The Fury, it's a bit far on now to recap from the beginning, but basically everyone's hiding out in Fursville, this old abandoned theme park or amusement park, and they are all now aware that something very weird and very wrong has gone on in the world. Something's gone very wrong with the world. This corpse in London has suddenly burst out of its ambulance and now is become like a vortex, sucking in anything around it like a tornado, and nobody knows where it's going or what it is, and it's growing. And Cal and Daisy and Brick and Rilke and everyone else sensed this thing happening, and they realised that it's got something to do with why they are sort of creating this effect in people, and so maybe something that's inside them. And they realise that if this thing spreads, then it's gonna basically destroy everything. So we're inside. We've had a bit of a falling out. Rilke, after shooting Brick's girlfriend, has had a falling out with everyone, understandably. Brick is feeling like he wants to kill her, and there's a rift between everyone in Fursville. So Rilke, Fursville, 8:42 a.m. Please, Rilke, I just need to talk to you. Rilke stood by the restaurant doors, listening to Cal rant and rave. He'd been out there for a while now, pacing back and forth like a wolf, first pleading, then threatening, then fuming. Rilke, we need our food, our drink, it's not fair, that's our stuff. He banged on the door, flakes of ice drifting loose. Rilke's silent laugh came out as little puffs of breath. She clutched the gun, her hand so numb from the cold that she couldn't feel it, only its weight. Look, you don't have to speak to me. You don't have to see the others. Just let me in for 5 seconds and I'll get what I need. You can keep some of the rations, okay? The door rocked on its hinges, making her take a step back. Cal kicked it again, hard, the wood creaking. I wouldn't do that if I were you, said Rilke. Then let me in, Cal said. We need food. I'm coming through these doors one way or the other, Rilke. She didn't answer, happy to let him stew in his own anger. He was so predictable, thinking he could do what he wanted because he was a boy, because he was strong. Rilke knew why she had been chosen, but why Cal, why the others? They were pathetic. Rilke, he snapped, I mean it. You have to let me in. No, I don't. Her smile widened. She was in charge because she had all the food. Cal and the others couldn't just stroll down to the nearest Tesco's and do their grocery shopping. Open the door, Cal yelled. Seriously, I'm getting really pissed off. Are you going to shoot us all? Tell me what you want, or I swear to God, I'm going to break this door down and give you a slap, girl or no girl. Rilke uttered a brittle chuckle that seemed colder than the breeze. I only want one thing, she said. I want to talk to Daisy. Cal protested, but after a while he gave up. She listened to him retreat down the stairs, his curses eventually fading into the immense quiet of the pavilion. She pressed her forehead against the frozen wood of the doors, wondering if he would give her what she had asked for. He will. He has to if he wants to eat. She straightened and walked over to the nearest table, laying the gun down beside a flickering candle. She had to peel her fingers from the cold metal. It was incredible, really, that something so small could be so deadly, that simply squeezing your finger could result in the end of a life. But the two people she had killed, the two humans, They hadn't deserved to live. None of them did. That's why she was here, why she'd been chosen, and very soon she'd have weapons which would make this gun look like a plastic toy. Isn't that what she'd felt last night? The knowledge that there was something out there, something terrible and yet wonderful. A force of pure destructive power. Schiller lay in his pocket of ice, his body still radiating cold like an inverse sun. He hadn't so much as twitched since the previous evening, but she knew he wouldn't stay like that forever. She wasn't sure how she knew, she just did. He wasn't dying, he was changing, like a caterpillar in a cocoon. "But into what, Schill?" she whispered. "What are you becoming?" Daisy had the answers. The little girl didn't realise it, but they were locked away somewhere inside that pretty little head of hers. She just needed a little bit of encouragement to get them out. The candle was struggling, as if the darkness had weight, snuffing out the solitary flame. Rilke took another one from the pile she'd collected, lighting it from the first and planting it in a socket of melted wax. It, too, began to stutter against the heavy gloom. She smiled at the blatant metaphor. We few are the flames, she thought to herself, mesmerised by the dancing colours. We are the light in the darkness. And what could the darkness be other than humanity, this crushing, heaving mass of people who have no legitimate right to life? How many souls lived on Earth now? 6 billion? 7? All of them, like insects, crawling around on their hands and knees and slaughtering one another in pursuit of scraps. They were ignorant. They were cruel. They were the night that smothered the day. They did not deserve their existence. That's why all this was happening. That's why she and Schiller had been attacked, why they'd all been attacked. The people sensed something different in them, something special, and they hated it, because it was better than them. She remembered the men and women back at the rave, the way they'd turned into beasts, biting, clawing, scratching, howling. They had acted like animals because that's all they were. Because they had sensed that Rilke and Schiller were more than them, that she and her brother were dangerous, that they were... She paused, unable to think of the right word. The twin flames fluttered, but they didn't go out. They wouldn't go out. They wouldn't succumb to the darkness. And what about the thing she had sensed last night? That wave of utter nothingness. That awful knowledge that what lay beneath the skin of the world was an infinite abyss of absence. She wasn't sure, but this creature, this force, whatever it was, might be here to show them the way. As dark as its image had been, it might be the light they needed to follow. Why else would she have seen it? Footsteps, more than one set. Rilke cocked her head, feeling Daisy's presence outside even before Cal's voice came through the doors. "She's here," he said. "She says she'll talk to you, but only if you let us have some food." Rilke walked to the doors, then doubled back and picked up the gun. Cal was too pathetic to try anything, she was pretty sure about that, but she couldn't afford to take any chances, not when the truth was so close. She slid back the lock, then pulled open the door with her free hand. Daisy stood there, squinting. Cal was beside her. "You don't have to go in," he said. "Whatever she has to say, she can say it right here." "It's okay," said Daisy. "She isn't going to hurt me." Daisy gave Cal a hug, then walked into the restaurant. Cal watched her go, then glared at Rilke. "You'd better not," he hissed. "You'd better not lay a finger on her. I'll be right here, Rilke. I'm not going anywhere." Rilke laughed at him, then let the door swing shut in his face. Daisy. Fursville. I literally look like I'm possessed, but like I'm this close. Daisy, I'm going to sit back here. Daisy, Fursville, 9:03 a.m. Daisy walked to the table with the candles and sat down, putting her trembling hands between her knees so that Rilke wouldn't notice she was scared. She had lied to Cal. She didn't know if Rilke was going to hurt her or not, but she had to do something to get some food or they'd all starve. She glanced around as innocently as she could, but she couldn't see the carrier bags anywhere. "I've put them somewhere safe," said Rilke, her eyes gleaming. She walked over, placing the gun in the middle of the table before sitting opposite Daisy. Her face had the same crazy look as yesterday. It was dangerous. "Just until we've had a little talk." "About what?" said Daisy, shivering. It was colder than ever in here. Schiller entombed in ice on the sofa. "You know what," said Rilke, planting her elbows and stretching her hands across the table. The way her forearms uncurled made Daisy think of a praying mantis. She didn't offer her own hands. "About this," About everything. But I don't know anything, said Daisy. And where would the food be? In a corner somewhere or under a table? I think you do, said Rilke, her face splitting into a grin, her eyes burning. I think it's all there, in your head. You just don't know how to read it. Daisy didn't answer. Maybe Rilke was right. There had been all kinds of things happening in her brain that she couldn't make any sense of. The ice cubes rattling and clinking around, showing her things she couldn't possibly know. They were doing it right now, but they were moving too fast, the way they seemed to do when she was frightened. I don't want you to be scared of me, Daisy, said Rilke, gentler now. We're the same, you and I. Except I don't murder people, she thought. But she didn't say. I had no choice, Rilke went on. You know how dangerous the ferals are. You can't have forgotten what happened already. Daisy shook her head, thinking of the ambulance man and his horse's teeth. Things are changing, Daisy. The world is changing. You felt it too, didn't you, yesterday evening? All I want is to know what it was. Because I think something is trying to tell us what to do, is trying to guide us, only we don't know how to listen. That made a strange kind of sense. It did feel a bit like when she was at school sometimes, and she didn't really understand what the teacher was saying. Rilke stretched her hands out a little bit further, opening them to Daisy. I know things have been really bad. I've lost people too, and I'm worried I'm going to lose my brother. The whole world has turned against us. We have to be there for each other. We're different now, different to the rest of them, all of us, me, you, Shill, Cal, Brick and the others. We're a family. We have to trust each other. Daisy liked the idea of a family. Cal already felt like her brother. In fact, it was as if she'd been friends with all of them forever, even the new boy Marcus, who, she knew without being told, liked loud music and hated football. She hoped Cal wouldn't mind this last fact. Rilke, too, wasn't a stranger. She never had been. She relaxed a little, her hands creeping towards Rilke's. Do you trust me? Rilke asked. Daisy chewed her lip, then nodded. Rilke's smile widened even further, revealing a row of perfect, small teeth. Then take my hands. This time, Daisy didn't hesitate. She threaded her fingers through Rilke's, the girl's skin as cold as marble. Rilke held her tight, not so hard that it was painful, though. The contact felt nice. She smiled back at her, forgetting why she'd been so worried before. You're a special girl, Daisy, said Rilke, her voice barely louder than the flutter of the candles. You can do amazing things. I think we all can. Not yet, maybe, but soon. I think we all have a gift. What kind of gift? Daisy asked. Her ice cubes didn't feel anything like a Christmas present. She wasn't sure she even wanted them when they made her feel sad and frightened. Rilke squeezed her. Think about it, Daisy. Why would the whole world turn against us? Why would they try to kill us? Because they hate us, I suppose, Daisy replied, shrugging. Rilke shook her head. Think. Why would they hate us? What would make them behave that way? Daisy frowned, wishing that Rilke would just tell her. She hated being asked questions that she didn't know the answer to. Then, out of nowhere, she said, because they're scared of us. Rilke nodded, obviously delighted, and Daisy felt some of the stress drain from her chest. It made a certain kind of sense, she realised. People did do silly things when they were really scared. Even so, they didn't usually start trying to pull your arms and legs off. Don't they? Said Rilke, interrupting her thoughts, and Daisy couldn't tell whether the other girl had spoken or not. It's happened before, throughout history. The ones that are different, who rise above just being human, people get scared of them. They kill them. What if they're supposed to be scared of us, Daisy? What if they're right to be scared of us? Why? Daisy said, struggling. Rilke eased her grip, but she didn't let go. Don't be frightened. I'm not going to hurt you. I could never hurt you. Don't you see? Don't you remember that feeling from yesterday? Daisy shivered, just thinking about it, that wave of utter sadness that had washed over her when she was standing outside. No, it hadn't been sadness exactly. It had been worse than that. It had been as if all emotion had gone, as if there was nothing left. She couldn't explain it, only it had felt like standing alone in an endless dark room and knowing that there was nobody else anywhere in the whole universe. It's a sign, Rilke said, a sign that everything is going to change. But why? Daisy asked, feeling her throat tighten. People will get hurt. I don't want that. People are nice. Are they, Daisy? Rilke said. Think about it. Really think about it. Daisy didn't want to, but she did. Thoughts of the time she'd been bullied back in her old school when she'd had eczema on her arms and everyone had called her names. The little boy in her town who'd been murdered by the creep who'd delivered leaflets, whose body had never been found. All the riots on telly, people beating each other up for stupid things they didn't even need. And even her own mum, when the cancer had been bad, when it had made her say things that were really cruel. There was another memory too, but this one was Rilke's, a man with rough fingers and long, dirty nails and breath that smelled of coffee and alcohol, his huge face looming in. Daisy squirmed, pushing the thoughts away, so sick of having other people's hate and fear and confusion inside her head, ready to scream, "Leave me alone!" "No," she insisted, choking on the word. "People are good, Rilke. They're nice, most of them. I don't want things to change." Rilke's smile vanished, replaced by a look of sympathy and compassion that was heartbreaking. "It's too late. I'm sorry, Daisy, but it is. What's happening to the world? It's already begun." "But what is happening?" Daisy asked, catching her breath. Rilke squeezed her hands, pulling them closer to her. "We are," she said. "We're happening, don't you see? Isn't it clear what we have to do? We've been sent here to make things different, to clean things up. Look inside your head, Daisy, and tell me I'm wrong." She didn't want to, not again. If she peered into those ice cubes, then who knew what she might see? It would be bad, though, and there would be fire. Please, Daisy, Rilke said. "I can't do this without you. I need you. Schiller needs you. We all do. Just see for yourself." Daisy glanced again at the boy in the corner. He would be so hungry now and thirsty. He might die if they couldn't wake him up. As horrible as it might be, what if she could help? She tightened her grip on Rilke's hands, grateful at least that she wasn't on her own. Then she closed her eyes and let the images float to the surface. It was like taking off a big coat in the middle of winter, one that was drenched with snow and water and which weighed a ton. She became as light as the dust that rose in the candlelight, free of everything and anything that could hold her down. Even with her eyes closed, she could see the others as if they were all standing in the same room, only they weren't. They were scattered all over the park. Adam and Chris and the new boy, Marcus, still sleeping. They were sharing a dream, she realised, one involving tortoises. Jade sitting on the log flume thinking about a boy who had tried to kill her. Brick still mending the fence, his thoughts full of revenge, and Cal just outside the restaurant door, his ear against it, shivering as he tried to work out what was happening. There were loads more, boys and girls she didn't yet know but who she seemed to recognise. They were everywhere, maybe 20 of them, more even, and they were all flowing this way. The sight of them, although it wasn't quite a sight, it was more than that, a vision, was dizzying, but it was comforting. These were members of her family. They were all welcome. The same feeling from yesterday was there too, though, and this was certainly not welcome. It tainted everything, the way the world turns the colour of old bruises when a storm is about to start, and it made her feel like crying even though it had been so good to soar through her thoughts. She wanted to be away from this thing, whatever it was, and she fought to claw her way back into her body. "It's okay, nothing can hurt us here." The voice was Rilke's, emanating from everywhere. "Just a little longer, Daisy, just so we can see it." Why did she want to see it? It was horrid. But Rilke was right. It couldn't hurt them. Even though it felt like she was a million miles away in a million different places, she knew she was still inside the restaurant in the little park by the sea. She focused on the dark cloud, trying to work out what it was and why it felt so unkind. A picture began to emerge. A wide road with fields on either side of it. There were several big black cars there and men in suits holding guns. Some of those men were shrieking, others were pointing at... What was that? It was a man, but he was floating inside a whirlwind of chaos in his mouth. Daisy groaned. It isn't real, she told herself. But it was. This was the thing they'd all sensed last night. This lord of absence. She tried to close her eyes, but the pictures were in her head, the sounds coming from inside her. She could smell blood and burning meat and smoke. She could taste the thick, oily air on her tongue. None of it mattered, though, because the man in the storm had left her empty. There was nothing left of her. She had never, ever felt this alone. "I want to go," she said, feeling Rilke's hands over her own. "Please, Rilke, I want to..." A blast of light, like an old-fashioned photographer's flash. Then a raging fire bit into her skin, making her scream. It was as if the floor had given way, her stomach lurching up into her throat. She opened her eyes and the air was full of flames, flickering blue and yellow and red. Just as quickly they were extinguished, leaving the same wide road as before, only this time it was completely and utterly real. Rilke was there, her mouth open in a rictus of shock, her hair billowing around her shoulders. Both of them were standing now, their hands linked together, the wind roaring past them like a train. Hundreds of bright embers had been caught up in the gale, all being pulled in the same direction. Daisy watched them go, seeing them dragged towards the man in the storm. He was raised over the ground like he'd been crucified, his eyes blazing black light, his face like a drain sucking in clouds of darkness. The noise was terrible, an inward howl like someone with asthma taking their last desperate breath. It went on forever. All around him the air was in upheaval, like a tornado, like the one in the Wizard of Oz film. He's a sorcerer, she had time to think, or something worse. One of the cars was in the air, and Daisy looked through the windows to see 5 men inside, 2 of them dead, speared by a shaft of metal, the rest screaming. One, the man sitting in the middle of the back seat, glanced at her, and she could read the horror in his bulging eyes, his bared teeth. "I'm sorry," she said to him. "I can't save you." And somewhere in the chaos she realised that although she was here, actually here on this road, these events had already happened. She could almost hear the vast, groaning weight of broken time. The man in the storm hurled out another whip crack of black lightning, more of the world disintegrating. The car exploded into a million pieces, the bodies inside turning into sand and spiralling into the corpse's mouth. Daisy screamed, even her breath stolen by the wind. The man's lifeless eyes rolled towards her, the sensation like she'd been punched in the gut. And it knew who she was, because the raging storm seemed to call out her name. Only it wasn't her name. It wasn't even a word. The dead man flexed his fingers and Daisy felt herself rise from the ground. She gripped Rilke with everything she had, both of them swept up towards the vortex. And she knew that if they didn't get away right now, then they'd be pulled inside it, that they would become nothing. Even Rilke seemed to understand this. Daisy screwed her eyes shut, and suddenly she was falling again, the sensation so real that her body flailed. Another flash, more flames. She lurched backwards, the chair spilling over behind her, making her topple. She scrabbled on the cold ground, expecting to see the storm man there, ready to suck her up. But there was just the restaurant, and a blizzard of glowing embers, which drifted lazily to the ground. Daisy waited for the real world to feel solid again before sitting up. Rilke sat on the other side of the table, wearing that same lunatic grin. She looked at Daisy, and then she started to laugh. "I told you," she said. "I told you that things were about to change." Daisy got to her feet, half running, half tripping towards the doors, knowing she should be looking for food, but desperate to get away. She flew into them, fumbling for the lock, spilling out into Cal's arms. He held her tight in the warm glow from the foyer, stroking her hair as the tears came. "Are you okay? What happened? What did she do to you?" Daisy clung to him, hearing the sound of footsteps, then the crunch of the doors closing behind her, the snap of the lock. "Rilke, what did you do? Daisy, look at me." She tilted back her head and he ran his fingers over her cheek. They came away covered in fine, red sand. "What is this?" he asked, and there were tears in his eyes too. "Tell me." Daisy hugged him again. His shirt soon stained red with powdered blood. It wasn't hers, though. It wasn't Rilke's either. No, it belonged to a man whose body had disintegrated miles and miles from here, in another place and time, who had been dragged into the vortex. He'd been real. It had all been real. And so had the man in the storm. Cal, Fursville, 10:23 a.m. Cal lugged the heavy pan of water out of the kitchen door, careful not to trip over dead Edward Maltby, who still lay there covered by a tablecloth. Steam rose from the water that slopped inside it, welcome against his face. He'd heated it on one of the industrial gas hobs, which incredibly still worked. Chris was standing down the corridor outside the toilets. "Do you want me to take that for you?" he asked. Cal shook his head, even though his arms were trembling with the weight of the pan. He pushed into the left-hand toilet, laying the pan down beside the small shower unit that sat beside the single cubicle. Then he ducked into the staff room next door. Daisy was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in Jade's arms. The other girl had wiped most of the weird red sand from Daisy's face, but it was still stained pink, like she was sunburned. "Sorry it took so long," Cal said as Chris walked in after him. "Took ages to heat up." "Thanks," said Jade. Daisy glanced up, but she was looking at something far beyond Cal, something distant. He smiled at her, and she imitated him robotically. She hadn't said any more about what Rilke had done to her. She hadn't said much of anything at all since coming out of the restaurant. "No worries," he said. "It's not exactly nice through there, but it doesn't look too bad. I've seen worse bathrooms in my time. Just pretend you're at Glastonbury." "Come on, Daisy," said Jade, gently tugging on her hand and easing her from the sofa. "Let's get you cleaned up." Cal waited until they'd walked from the room before turning to Chris. "Where's Brick?" he asked. "He won't come. Says he's fixing up the fence." "That guy." He scowled, but he didn't finish. Cal was glad. Brick was a douche, yeah, but he had just seen his girlfriend get murdered. Cal walked past the sleeping figure of Adam and over to Marcus, shaking him gently. The new kid snorted, but it took another couple of attempts before his eyes opened. He flinched when he saw Cal, struggling inside his cocoon of tablecloths, before remembering where he was. "Sorry," said Cal. "I didn't want to wake you, but we need to know about Soapy's." "The car place," Marcus said, groaning as he sat up. "What about it? Is there more food over there?" He wiped the sleep from his eyes. Yeah, I think so. Not much, mind. A few cans, a couple of boxes of cereal, maybe. That's what I had. Tasted like a turd. Thought you had stuff here." "Long story," said Cal. "We don't. You up for a return trip?" "Over the road," said Marcus. "Yeah, sure. Just give me a minute." "Meet us outside," said Cal. He turned to Chris. "We should take weapons just in case." Cal walked into the corridor and through the fire door, blinking against the glaring sunshine. There wasn't a single cloud up there, the sky a vast, perfect blue. Any other weekend he'd be heading up the park with his mates or into town to sit outside the library, maybe even hopping the school fence to use the pitches for a kick-around. It seemed so long ago. He was already forgetting what they looked like, all of them, except Georgia. But even when he thought of her, he could only see her eyes, the rest of her face hidden behind a book. What's the point? Why bother trying to find food, he thought, trying to survive, when everything you had is gone? He sighed. The sunlight no longer quite as bright, the sky no longer quite as blue. Chris appeared beside him, scouring the ground, then waddling to a waist-high clutch of seagrass and wrestling something from it. He swung the wooden plank like it was a sword, and it snapped in two with a soft, rotten puff. "Guess not," he said, throwing it to the floor and wiping his hand down his trousers. "Ew, woodlice!" There was a rattle of chains and Marcus crawled through the fire door. He shot Cal a grin, holding his hand up to shield his eyes. "Ready when you are," he said. Cal set off again, heading for the front of the park. The big wheel towered overhead, creaking as it absorbed the morning heat. He gave it a wide berth, not wanting to be skewered if anything else decided to break free. The main path from the pavilion to the gates was strewn with rubble and debris, the earth still ruptured and black from the explosion. He spotted a rust and iron bar poking from the mess where the hot dog stand had been and pulled it free. It was 1/2 metre long and heavy. It wasn't exactly a gun, but it felt good when he swung it from side to side. "There's nobody over there," said Marcus. His arms were so skinny Cal didn't think he'd be able to hold a knife and fork, let alone a club. He bounced when he walked, his gangly body flapping. The kid could have been a scarecrow. "Better safe than sorry," said Cal, swinging the bar again, imagining it was caving in the side of Rilke's head. The image made his stomach curdle. There was no sign of Brick as they wove through the metal struts and turned left, heading for the boo-boo station. He was there, though. He was watching them. Cal could feel it. He walked to the fence and squeezed through, laurel leaves cool and waxy against his skin. It took him a little while to find his way past the thick hedge, but eventually he popped free of the foliage and found himself on a wide road that stretched right and left for as far as he could see. He felt weirdly exposed out here. Fursville wasn't exactly a fortress, but he'd come to think that as long as they stayed there, the Ferrells couldn't get them. The dealership was directly opposite, the box-shaped showroom drenched in the long shadow of the big wheel. "Coast looks clear," said Chris. "Place is deserted." "Like I said," added Marcus, "didn't see a soul when I was cycling up." "Well, don't let your guard down," said Cal. "Stay sharp." "Yes, sir, Colonel, sir," said Chris, snapping off a salute. Marcus laughed. Cal gave them both a look, then set off over the road. Their footsteps seemed like the loudest thing in the world, like gunfire. If there was a feral anywhere nearby, then surely it would hear them and come running. He bolted over the empty parking bays and slammed into the boarded-up showroom window. Marcus was next to him in a flash, Chris taking a few seconds longer, already out of breath. "Way-in's round the back," said Marcus, taking the lead around the side of the building. They passed a caged propane tank and the empty skeleton of a vending machine before reaching a door. It was open, nothing inside but darkness. Marcus slapped a hand to his head. "Oh yeah, I meant to say we should probably bring a torch." "Use this," said Chris, fishing his phone from his pocket and holding it out. Cal didn't take it, and Chris got the hint. "You want me to go first? I don't know the way." "I'll do it," said Marcus, pulling out his own phone and stepping through the door. He vanished immediately, like he'd been swallowed up. Cal followed him, hoping the others couldn't hear his racing pulse. Chris came in last, holding the phone over his head. They didn't do much to light the way, covering everything in a silver moon sheen and making the shadows twice as deep. They stuck close, almost touching as they scuffled down a short corridor. "Where are you from, anyway?" Chris said, his whisper as loud as a hurricane. "West," Marcus said. "On the border, really. Go out the front door, I'm Welsh. Go out the back, I'm English." "I know which one I'd rather be," said Chris. Marcus laughed and Cal hushed them both. "I think we're okay," said Chris. "If there was a bad guy in here, they'd have sensed us by now, wouldn't they?" He had a point, but all the same, Cal didn't feel comfortable creeping through the dark, making small talk. There were 2 doors at the end of the corridor, one leading into the main showroom. Marcus went through the other, into a large office, the floor covered in rubbish. There were rats in here. Cal could hear their faint chatter inside the walls. He opened his mouth to comment when a noise cut through the quiet. The screech, screech, screech sound from Psycho. He almost screamed. "Oh, sorry," said Marcus, holding up his phone. "Should probably change my ringtone, given what's going on." "I think I can find some new underwear in here," said Chris. "I need it after that." "Oh, it's my brother," Marcus explained, sliding the phone into his pocket. After a while, the noise ended. "He keeps calling to ask me where I am. Doesn't seem to remember trying to stamp on my face with his steel caps." Cal thought about his own phone. He couldn't get a signal out here, but what would have happened if he could? Would Megan have called again? Eddie? Georgia, maybe? Or his mum? Would she ask him where he was? Why he'd run away? The thought made his heart feel like a deflated balloon, and he was grateful for the darkness as he rubbed a tear off his face. "Anyway," said Marcus, "look around. There isn't much, but there are bits and pieces." Cal got down onto his hands and knees, trying not to notice the soft, wet pellets that littered the ground. The first couple of boxes he lifted up, one that might have been Frosty's, another faded beyond recognition, were empty. The third had something living which scuttled over his fingers into the gloom. He shuddered, resisting the urge to get up and bolt, instead crawling across the floor, feeling for anything that might be useful. "I've got something," said Chris. "Oh, damn. Candles. Is it anyone's birthday?" Nobody replied. Cal shuffled forward a little more, finding another box. This one rattled when he shook it, and he peeled open the flap to discover a sealed bag inside. He lifted the box up, squinting. "Anyone like old Weetabix?" "Got any milk?" said Marcus. "I've got Fanta," said Cal. Old Weetabix and Fanta, my favourite," the new kid said. It was another couple of minutes before Cal's knuckles hit a small jar, making it roll in a circle. He snatched it up, not realising how hungry he was until he read peanut butter on the label. "Jackpot!" he said, telling the others what he'd found. They both groaned, Marcus making puking noises. Weirdos. How could they not like peanut butter? They worked for a while in silence, the occasional whoop letting them know there was more treasure. Cal wasn't sure how much later it was that Marcus spoke. "You guys really not know what's going on then?" "No more than you," Cal answered. He found a packet of biscuits that pretty much dissolved into mush the moment he touched them. Now the air stank of digestives and mould. "I don't know anything," said the new kid. "Exactly," Cal muttered. "I guess they're not zombies, though," Marcus went on. "They're alive, for one thing. They go back to normal, too, when you're not around them. Well, the ones that haven't injured themselves. But even those ones don't remember how they got hurt. Did you notice that?" "Uh-huh." "Sponges," said Chris. "Oh, wait, they're the kind you wash dishes with, not the kind you eat." "I got hit at home, right?" Marcus said. "Like I said, my brothers. Man, it isn't like we really got on and all that well, but the way they turned on me, it's like they were... I don't know." Cal gave up looking. Everything was gone. Even the plug sockets had been stripped from the walls. This was pointless. Possessed, Marcus said. It's like they were possessed. You know, like in The Exorcist or something. You ever seen that film? Oh, a bit of it, Cal said. I got bored. Well, my brothers, they had this look on their faces, like they were possessed. I guess that's my theory. Demonic possession, said Chris. It sounded like he had a mouthful of something. They were supposed to be stockpiling. You reckon? Well, what's your suggestion, Marcus said. They could all sense Chris' shrug, even though they couldn't see it. What happened with your brothers? Cal asked. What do you think happened? I legged it. They were always bigger than me and stronger, but they were like a couple of cart horses. I legged it from them, I legged it from my mum, I legged it from every one of them. Pays to be skinny and fast sometimes. Like me, you mean? Said Chris. Yeah, just like you, Marcus laughed back. His tone was light, but Cal could hear a terrible sadness lying just beneath the surface. It made him want to be back in the light, in the fresh air. He moved towards the pile of food, squatting down beside it. Pile was a big overstatement, he realised. There were maybe 7 things there. Are you guys ready? He asked. Yeah, said Chris. Nothing over here but dust. I could have sworn there was more, said Marcus. Sorry. It'll keep us going, said Cal, picking up what he could and walking back down the corridor and out into the light, looking down at what he carried. Weetabix, a cracked jar of PB that looked runny and green, a box of marshmallow snowballs which had been half eaten by rats. Chris strolled out holding a can without its label and a box of Alpen which had lost most of its colouring. He pulled out the bag from inside and a trickle of flakes drifted out, leaving it empty. Oh, he said. Marcus followed, cradling a big bag of something that turned out to be dog biscuits. Oh, damn it, he said. I thought they were Oreos. Is that it? Asked Cal, a knot of dread forming in his stomach. This wouldn't be enough to feed them for a morning, let alone for however long it took for things to go right again. The truth was that even if they did manage to get their supplies back from Rilke, they wouldn't last forever on Haribo and Dr. Pepper. He looked around, seeing the road, the dunes, the distant factory. There was nothing else. Oh, we should get back, he said. The mighty hunters return with their spoils, said Chris. They sprinted over the road, their shadows elastic, held back by the garage. 2 words resounded in Cal's head with each set of pounded footsteps. We're dead. We're dead. We're dead. How are we doing? Brick, Fursville, 11:02 a.m. Brick watched them run back across the road from his lookout post above the main gates. Everything looked different from up here, like he'd literally risen above it. Like he could just watch the world go by and no longer be a part of it. Up here he was halfway to the sun, halfway to oblivion. It felt good. It was bloody uncomfortable, though. He shuffled, holding onto the big plastic exclamation mark of Fursville to stop himself from toppling off. It was only about 6 metres or so to the ground, but he'd probably still snap a leg or an arm or maybe a vertebrae. Cal and the 2 new kids disappeared into the hedge in completely the wrong place, and he could hear them rustling about in there, whispering urgently, trying to find the opening in the fence. They hadn't found much food. That was pretty clear. It didn't bother Brick too much. They had water, and that was the main thing. They'd think of some of him. He took a deep breath of salted air, then swung off the top of the pillar onto the small access platform that ran beneath the park banner. It creaked under his weight, but the rusted bolts held fast in the worn brick. When he'd been rooting around in the caretaker's shed, he'd found a can of paint and a couple of brushes that had seen better days. The paint was black, for ironwork, but it would do the job. He walked carefully down the ledge, stopping at the giant green S, using the handle to pop open the can. He gave the gloopy liquid inside a stir, then slapped the dripping brush against the plastic. A few big strokes did the trick, and he stood back to admire his handiwork. Furyville, he said, nodding. That works. He started back, then changed his mind and edged all the way to the end of the platform, where a big goofy animal smiled down at the world. It was another squirrel, the park mascot. Don't know what you're grinning at, Brick said, dunking the brush again and giving the creature a drooping, unhappy line for its mouth. He added 2 giant X's for its eyes, with sweeping, angry brows. The same picture he'd drawn back in the restaurant when Cal and Daisy had first arrived. Not so happy now, are you? He left the paint there, wiping his hands down his jeans. The fumes were making him light-headed, and he retreated to the ladder, climbing carefully back to solid ground. He could hear laughter from nearby, and he trudged towards it, curious. Daisy, Jade and Adam were sitting on the carousel. Daisy was the one who was giggling, the sound like birdsong. She was pretending to ride her horse, as were the other 2, like they were racing the Grand National. Cal, Marcus and Chris were standing beside them, holding whatever they got from the garage and grinning as they watched the race. Brick turned to go. It was better for everyone if he wasn't around at the moment. He'd only taken a couple of steps, however, before Daisy called out his name. He looked back to see her waving at him. Her face was spotless and glowing and seemed too tiny to hold that giant smile. She looked like an angel. The others glanced over as well, Cal holding up a hand. Brick hovered for a second, unsure, then swallowed his protests and joined them. "We're having a race," said Daisy, jiggling up and down and kicking her legs. Adam was shaking an invisible pair of reins so hard he was in danger of falling off. Jade was going along with it, her head down and her butt up like a jockey. None of their horses was actually moving, of course, although the whole carousel was rattling alarmingly. "Yeah," he said. "Who's winning?" "It's not that sort of race, silly," Daisy said. "We're all winning." Brick considered telling her the definition of race, then decided better of it. He turned to Cal. "Any luck?" "What you see is what you get," Cal said, holding out a box of cereal. "It's these and some dog biscuits, I'm afraid." "We can feed the dog biscuits to the horses," exclaimed Daisy, breathless. "They'll need something after all this running." "That's a deal," said Cal. "Biscuits for the horses, Weetabix for the jockeys." "I think I'd rather be a horse," said Chris. "Weetabix tastes like crispy crap." The new boy, a skinny runt of a kid, waved a bandaged hand. Marcus." "Brick," said Brick. "Brick? What kind of a name is that?" "Because I'm built like a brick outhouse, obviously," he said. Marcus laughed. "No, you're not. You're almost as skinny as I am." "Bollocks," said Brick. But the new kid's good humour was kind of contagious. He stuck his middle finger up at him, doing his best to scowl. "Welcome to Furyville, anyway." "Furyville?" said Cal. Brick held up his paint-stained hands, but he couldn't be bothered to explain. The others looked at each other, perplexed, but nobody pressed it. Brick turned back to the carousel, the three people there even more animated than before. "Come on, Angie, we're nearly there," cried Daisy. "Adam, you have to talk to your horse. You have to make it feel good." The little boy shook his head, glancing nervously at his audience, but still tugging on those imaginary reins. "You have to talk to it, Jade," Daisy screamed. "Remember, it's called Wonky Butt, the Wonder Horse." "It's called Samson," Jade said. "You're called Wonky Butt." The three of them rode hard, their horses wild-eyed and nostrils flared. So real, despite the fact they were obviously plastic. And for an instant Brick was tearing over the ground, the wind rushing past his ears, the bulk of the animal beneath him, the sensation of movement so powerful that he was gripped by vertigo. He closed his eyes, staggering, thinking, that's what she's seeing. That's what's going through Daisy's head. And it was so good to be moving. Then, just like that, the moment passed. He opened his eyes, grateful for the fact that nobody was watching him. "So anybody want one of these?" Cal asked, rummaging in the cereal box. "They're out of date, but..." He opened the bag and pulled out one of the blocks, sniffing it cautiously and shrugging. "I don't think they're too bad." "As long as you try it first," said Chris, "in case they're poisonous." Cal nibbled the Weetabix. He pulled a face as he swallowed, then took a bigger bite. "Gross," he said through a mouthful of mush, "but it's better than nothing." He handed one to Chris, then another to Marcus. Brick shook his head when he was offered, then took one anyway. He didn't know when he'd get to eat again. He bit off half of it in one go, the biscuit like cardboard. It took him an age of chewing before it was small enough to force down his throat. Cal was up on the carousel, handing out Weetabix to the others. "Are they made by Nestle? If they are, I'm not supposed to eat them," said Daisy, looking at the box. "My mum said Nestle are evil." "Don't worry, they're not," said Marcus, smiling. "Hey, maybe that's what's causing all this. Maybe Nestle have put something in their food that turns people into crazy zombies." "I thought you were all for the demonic possession argument," said Chris. "The what?" asked Brick, almost choking on the last bit of his biscuit. "Demonic possession," said Chris. "Possession by demons." Duh, I know what it means. I mean, why did you think it?" Marcus waved it away, then realised everyone was looking at him. "Oh, I don't know, it was just a thought. Because, what do you call them, the ferals? The ferals act like they're possessed, like they've got demons in them or something." Brick spat out a humorless laugh. "You've got more chance of being right with the Nestle thing," he said. "At least I'm trying to think of things," Marcus said with a gangly shrug. "Don't see you guys coming up with anything." "What are demons?" asked Daisy. She'd stopped riding now and was looking at Marcus with an intense curiosity. "Are they the same as bad ghosts?" "Kind of," said Marcus. "They're like evil spirits or something. They can go inside you and take over your body, like you're a puppet or something." "In films," Cal butted in. "That's all, in films. They're not real." "Oh, okay," Daisy said, starting to bounce on her horse again. Adam was imitating her, and at least the little kid was kind of smiling. Jade was climbing down from her faded saddle. She looked exhausted. "No, Jade!" Daisy yelled. "Not until the race is over." "It's a relay," the other girl said. "I'm passing the baton. Who wants it?" "Brick does," said Daisy. "Let him have a go." He said, backing away. "No chance. Give it to someone else." "It's yours, Brick," said Jade, hopping down from the carousel and approaching him. "Come and get it." She broke into a run, grinning, and a wild excitement rose in Brick's chest, one that made him swirl around and start to run too. He tripped, his arms wheeling, and Jade slapped him on the back. "It! Brick's it!" And before he even knew what he was doing, he was tearing after Cal, the other boy kicking up dust as he spun out of the way, too fast to catch. Brick changed direction, darting after Chris, the bigger boy wobbling as he bolted. "No fair, you can't get me, I'm big-boned!" Brick tagged him, spinning off in a different direction as Chris jumped onto the carousel and chased Daisy and Adam from their horses. They ran in circles around the central joist, everyone overcome with laughter. Even Brick, sprinting as Daisy gave chase, laughing so hard he couldn't run straight, tears streaming, the wind roaring in his ears just like before. So good to be moving, always moving. We've got time for one more. Oh, yeah. Just mute my microphone there. Maybe my microphone is trying to tell me something. No more. I love that that chapter where they're running. It reminds me of the chapter in Furnace where Monty cooks them dinner. That one little moment of, things are all right, before everything goes really bad. Okay. We'll try and fit two more in. Rilke, Furyville. Furyville. I can't believe I changed it from Fursville to Furyville. Furyville, 12:43 p.m. Even though she couldn't see them, Rilke knew what they were doing. She could feel it, a warmth that crept through the chilled air of the restaurant, a light that robbed the shadows of their strength. They were letting themselves laugh. They were letting themselves forget. And it was wrong. She was so cold now that she could no longer feel anything. Even the chills had subsided, her body too frozen to shake. There was no light to see her skin by, but she knew it would be the colour of ivory, maybe even gunmetal blue, like the time she'd been locked out of the house for 3 hours in the middle of a blizzard. She could feel the dusting of ice on her, but it no longer burned. She was beyond pain. Schiller lay where he had lain since they arrived, his breathing as steady and as slow and as constant as the ocean outside. He emanated the winter wind, and it was because of this that Rilke wasn't scared of it. Why would she be frightened of her brother? He had never hurt her. He idolised her. More to the point, why should she be frightened of what he was becoming? If they had been chosen for a reason, then surely they wouldn't be harmed in the process. After all, you didn't kill soldiers during training. Rilke pulled her legs against her chest. The last candle had gone out a while ago. Exactly how long she had no idea, and she couldn't quite make herself get up to light another. There were jumpers and other clothes strewn around the room, mainly Cal's. She wouldn't wear any extra layers, though. Whatever was doing this to them, maybe it was testing them. She didn't want to look weak. Unlike the others, their weakness rode into her head on a wave of light and warmth, nauseatingly pathetic. The world was changing, something incredible was happening, and yet all they could do for the past hour or more was run around outside like children, laughing. And they had no idea. They had no respect for what they had become, and they would pay for it. They would be punished. Her eyes were sore and she tried to blink, but her skin was too cold and her eyelids wouldn't obey. This didn't matter either. She got the feeling that soon she wouldn't need them. She wouldn't need any part of her body. She would never feel the cold again. Neither would Schiller when he broke out of his icy chrysalis. That's why she'd kept him in here rather than take him out in the sun to thaw. It had all been part of his test, and surely he had passed. She sat and she shivered and she thought. What had happened when Daisy had been in the room? Rilke remembered the creature they had witnessed. It had towered over the world, a vortex of strength. It had been terrifying, yes, the same way death was terrifying, because it was something pure, something ultimate. It was a force of good, not because of any artificial sense of morality, but because it would strip away everything ugly, the tainted, the impure, the rotten, the broken. It promised oblivion, beautiful, flawless, a nothing into which all the world would fall. And she had been chosen to help it. Are you sure? Something in her mind asked. A voice locked in the core of her head. Are you really sure, Rilke? Because it doesn't seem right. But it was right. How could there be any other explanation? The human race had turned against her and Schiller, and the rest of them too. It had hunted them down the same way villagers hunt down a lion or a wolf that's been feeding on their livestock. People had turned on them because they were scared, and they should be, she thought, trying to work her frozen face into a smile. They should be terrified. It had run its course, humankind. That much was clear. It had always been clear. Rilke despised church, and yet there had been a truth in the stories she heard while sitting on those cushionless pews. Warnings that humanity's place here was not to be taken for granted, and stories of a terrible vengeance that could be wreaked upon those who did. It had happened before, and now it would happen again. A flood of fire and wind and blood that would wipe the world clean. And had they learned? No. Every day, war and famine and pestilence and disease. Every day, murder and greed and fear and stupidity. Worse things too, things that had happened to her that she never ever let herself think about. Yes, every day the human race became sicker, and this thing was the cure. Antichrist, she thought. Yet this thing, this man in a storm that she had seen, was older than anything written in the Bible. It was as old as time. How can you know that? She asked, the tiny part of her that still doubted, but she did know it. Just as she understood that there was something in her too, something like this creature, only different. There was one in each of them. There were still so many questions, but Rilke had faith that the answers would come in time, for now she knew enough. Something had called on her and her brother to try and make the world right. Something had called upon them both to fight. They had all been chosen, even the idiots outside. If Cal and Brick and Daisy and the rest of them decided not to accept, then they'd be punished, just like the vermin who scurried through the streets in every single corner of the planet. Yes, everything was about to change. Rilke understood that better than she'd understood anything else in her life. She was a soldier now, and there was a war coming. Daisy. Make this last one. Daisy, Furyville, 3:02 p.m. Are you okay? Daisy looked up, shaken from a weird sensation. Cal was looking at her, his face still flushed from their games. It had been so much fun, more fun than Daisy could remember having in ages. Even back at school, people didn't really play tag or hide and seek anymore. They were considered baby games. But they'd spent ages running around the park, chasing each other and hiding and laughing so much she thought her lungs were going to stop working. Now she and Cal and Adam were sitting on the wooden walkway that led up to the log flume. It was absolutely baking, the sun even fiercer than the one time she'd been abroad to Mallorca. She couldn't bear to go back inside, though, not after what had happened with Rilke. Even the shade made her feel scared. Out here in the sun, there was only chasing and games and fun and laughter. I'm okay, she said. I'm just tired. You must be, Cal replied. I don't think I've ever seen anyone run so fast for so long. You even managed to catch Brick, and his legs are like 3 meters long. Daisy giggled, her side still protesting from the stitches they'd had earlier. Brick had gone off somewhere with Marcus and Jade, and Chris had staggered off to the toilet a while back, saying that all the running around had knocked something loose. Daisy didn't like to think about what he meant. She shifted on her uncomfortable seat, putting an arm around Adam's shoulders. Are you thirsty? She asked. He shook his head. Cal had brought out another saucepan full of tap water, cold this time, and they'd taken turns drinking from it. Are you hungry? Would you like another Weetabix? Adam pulled a face. Daisy didn't blame him. They tasted horrible without milk and loads of sugar. It was like eating a piece of wood. She'd had to force 2 down because she was starving, but it hadn't done much to fill her up. Right now she'd give just about anything for a cheese and ham panini or one of those margarita pizzas from Tesco's that her dad always used to buy. She wished Rilke would stop being so cruel and just let them have some of their supplies, and there was no way... There had been there'd been chocolate up there and jelly sweets. And there was no way that Rilke could eat them all by herself. Rilke. The funny feeling she'd just had was about her, but she couldn't quite work out what it was. Being out in the sunshine seemed to have melted the ice cubes in her head, blurring them all into a big squidgy mess that didn't make any sense. It was nice. She was tired of seeing the world through other people's thoughts. She hoped they would never come back. Earth to Daisy, said Cal, waving his hand. You sure you're okay? She nodded, but there was something else niggling at her. The thing that Marcus had said, demons and possession. She didn't really understand what possession meant, what possessed meant, only that you weren't yourself. What had Marcus said? It was like something inside your body controlling you, like you were a puppet. That was a pretty good explanation of what was going on, wasn't it? She thought about Mrs. Baird, the lovely old lady next door who'd always brought round pots of yummy marmalade and disgusting chutney. Why would she suddenly try to attack her, unless something was making her do it? The same with the ambulance man and all the others. If there was a nasty ghost or whatever living in their bodies making them do things, that would explain everything. But how were they supposed to make themselves better? Adam, she said, do you like flowers? The boy looked up at her, frowning. Daisy pointed to a little cluster of purple blooms that poked up from the seagrass. I do. Do you think you could pick me some? He nodded, then ran over to the patch. When he was out of earshot, Daisy turned to Cal. How'd you get rid of demons? Huh? He said. You mean what Marcus said? Just ignore him, Daisy. He was being silly. I'm not scared, she lied. I just think, what if he was right? He's not. Demons aren't real. People just made them up hundreds of years ago, thousands maybe, because they didn't know how to explain all the bad stuff in the world. They thought people did horrible things because they were possessed. But maybe that is why people are doing horrible things, she said. That would explain why everyone tried to kill us, because they're possessed and we're not. Cal took a deep breath, gazing out towards the silver strip of sea that hung over the back fence. Sunlight caught in his hair. He was very handsome, Daisy thought. He was the kind of boy who might be on a Disney Channel show. I don't know, he said. I don't know if we'll ever know for sure. He looked back at her. But please don't worry, okay? We're safe here. Demons or no demons, they can't hurt you. I know, she said, another lie. Adam was running back with a handful of scraggly flowers. He dropped one, spilling most of the rest when he bent down to pick it up. Daisy got up to help, but by the time she'd reached him, he'd recovered them all. He thrust out the blooms with a bashful grin, and she took them, their sweet scent making her feel slightly woozy. They're so beautiful, Adam, thank you. He didn't reply. Just ran back to where he'd been picking them and lifted a stick from the dusty ground. He began to whack the seagrass like he was a swashbuckling pirate attacking a ship. Boys will be boys, she thought. She picked one of the small buds and tucked it behind her ear, the way her mum sometimes did when she was out in the garden. Then she looked back at Cal. We should put these in some water. No probs, he said, getting up and stretching. Come on, there are jugs and things in the kitchen. They wandered slowly back towards the pavilion, Adam following and taking wild swipes at everything he passed. When they reached the fire door, however, Daisy heard a scuffling coming from the back of the park. What is that? She asked. Wait here, said Cal. I'll go and check. He set off, but she didn't wait, chasing after him as he disappeared around the corner of the pavilion. When she peeked, she saw him standing outside one of the little buildings, the one that said, Danger, do not enter. The voices inside reverberated with an eerie metal twang. I think that's it. No, wait, this one. This one? Oh, hell, I don't know, try it. Bugger off, you try it. Daisy pressed up against Cal, looking into the shed to see Marcus and Chris there. The walls were covered in weird boxes and wires and big yellow stickers that had skulls and crossbones on them. What are they doing? She asked Cal. I have no idea. Hey guys, what are you doing? Chris turned and flashed them a grin from the dark. Marcus here is an electrician. He reckons he can get the park up and running. We'll have lights and aircon, arcades, games, maybe even a telly if we can find one. No, Marcus said. One, I'm not an electrician. I've just started my apprenticeship in plumbing, and we cover a bit of electrics too for bathrooms and stuff. Two, this place hasn't had a feed in years, so there's maybe a 0.1% chance that anything will work ever again. Like I said, Chris went on, he's going to fix it. Marcus sighed and turned back to whatever he was doing. Are you sure that's a good idea? Cal asked. If it does work and we start using electricity, won't people notice? But neither of the boys was listening. They were fighting over something that Chris was holding, which didn't seem like a great idea, giving all the warning stickers. Come on, said Cal. Let's leave them to blow themselves up. They walked back the way they'd come, crawling in through the fire doors. Almost as soon as the cold darkness of the corridor gripped her, Daisy felt the ice cubes start to return, clinking their way back to the surface of her brain. She tried to push them down again, but they kept slipping loose and rising. She followed Cal into the kitchen, telling herself not to look at the dead man. He wasn't there. and at first she thought that maybe he'd gotten up and walked off. Then she saw the tracks, oil black in the gloom, which led off towards the basement. Somebody finally must have moved him. "Here you go," said Cal, picking a cracked, filthy tumbler from one of the shelves and filling it from the tap. "This should do it." He handed it to her, and she placed the flowers inside. They were wilting already, as if the darkness of the building had weight. She could feel it too, like a pressure pushing her down, squashing her. "Can we go back outside?" she asked. Cal nodded, and she could see by his expression that he was scared in here. Scared of the dark, scared of Rilke. They retreated up the corridor, stopping only when they heard Brick behind them, slamming through the door from the foyer. "Oh, she still isn't letting us in," he said. "I swear I'm going to light this whole place on fire and smoke her out." "Calm down, Brick," said Cal as they waited for him to catch up. "We'll think of something else." "See if she's so smug when she's burning," he said. "Her and her brother. See if she's so smug when she has to watch him die." Daisy squeezed under the chains, holding them up so that Cal and then Brick could follow. Out in the sun, the bigger boy seemed to lose some of his anger, but his fists were still clenched so hard that Daisy could see where his long nails dug into the flesh of his palms. It was so sad, because just an hour ago he'd been running around with the rest of them, his laugh a high-pitched giggle that had made him seem like an entirely different person. "She wouldn't even answer me," he said. "After everything, after what she did, she wouldn't even answer me." "Come on," said Cal, putting a hand on the other boy's shoulder. "Let's go and find the others. I think we need to make a plan." A plan is definitely what they need. There we go. So I reckon 2 more days, maybe 3, and we'll have got through the first book. We're back with Cal again tomorrow. Hopefully I'll be less glowing by then. Speaking of The Exorcist, I do actually look like I have been possessed by some kind of demonic entity, which has obviously forced me to wear this Christmas jumper. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. I will be back very, very soon. Hopefully tomorrow, but it's the weekend tomorrow, so it'll all depend. We've got children's parties. It might not be tomorrow, or it might be tomorrow evening. I don't know. But anyway, I'll do my best and to come back as soon as possible, and we'll definitely get this finished next week. And then I'll start on The Fury Part 2, which was called The Storm, which is actually inside the main book of The Fury, if you're in America, or if you're in Britain and got the director's cut, which I didn't name. Have a great afternoon, whatever you're doing. And yeah, I will see you soon. Stay furious. Toodaloo.